My daughter-in-law broke into my apartment 36 times in 3 months. She called it checking in. I called it a felony. When I confronted her, she laughed and told my son I was losing my mind. She thought I was just a senile old man protecting a meager pension check. She had no idea she was declaring war on a retired forensic accountant who knows exactly how to bury people with paper. That night, at 2 in the morning, the silent alarm tripped, and I finally closed the trap. Before I tell you how I destroyed their lives, please like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. I walked into apartment 4B at exactly 11:15 in the morning. The door was unlocked. It was the 3rd time this week. The hallway smelled of cheap vanilla perfume and aggressive ambition. It was the scent of Megan. I did not call out. I did not panic. I simply closed the door behind me with a soft click and listened. The floorboards in the living room creaked. A lesser man might have shouted for an explanation, but I have spent 40 years hunting corporate embezzlement, and I know that you never interrupt a crime in progress until you have gathered all the variables. I moved silently across the worn carpet toward the bedroom. The door was ajar. Through the crack, I saw her. Megan was bent over my nightstand. Her fingers were rifling through the drawer with a frantic entitlement that made my blood run cold. She pulled out my heart medication. She shook the bottle next to her ear like it was a maraca testing the weight, gauging how many pills were left. She tossed it back in with a careless thud. She was looking for something specific. She was looking for calm too, or perhaps a will that she hoped would detail a fortune I pretended not to have. I watched her for a full minute. I watched her lift the mattress corner. I watched her check the pockets of my old wool coat hanging on the back of the door. She moved with the confidence of someone who believed she owned the space and the person inhabiting it. Are you looking for a hidden fortune? Or just checking if I have expired yet, Megan? My voice was calm, level, and dry. She did not jump. She did not scream. She froze for a fraction of a second, and then turned around with a smile that did not reach her eyes. It was a smile of pure condescension. "Oh, Gerald, you scared me." She said it as if I were the intruder. "I was just stopping by to make sure you hadn't fallen in the shower or forgotten to eat." You know how you get lately. Confused. I looked at the open drawer. I looked at the mattress she had displaced. I looked at her. You are checking my medication and lifting my mattress to see if I have eaten. That is a fascinating medical approach, Megan. You have a key I never gave you. This is the 36th time you have entered this apartment without permission in 90 days. Megan laughed. It was a sharp, dismissive sound that bounced off the peeling wallpaper. 36 times. Listen to yourself, Gerald. You are imagining things again. Brandon told me you were getting paranoid. I come here to help you, to clean up. This place is a dump. If you are going to be ungrateful, maybe I should just stop coming and let you rot. She brushed past me, bumping my shoulder with unnecessary force. She smelled of lies and that cloying vanilla. She stopped at the doorway and looked back. Her eyes swept over me not as a father-in-law, but as a liability she was desperate to liquidate. You should be thanking me. A man your age living alone in this neighborhood. It is irresponsible. You are losing your grip, Gerald. Everyone sees it. Even Brandon. She walked out and left the front door wide open. She did not care if I was safe. She wanted me to feel unsafe. She wanted me to feel exposed. I walked to the door and locked it. My hands did not shake. My heart rate remained steady. She was trying to gaslight a man who used to find decimal point errors in billion-dollar ledgers. She thought I was losing my grip. She had no idea that I was just tightening it. I called Brandon that evening. I told him it was urgent. He arrived at 6 o'clock looking exhausted and smelling of the fast food he ate in his car to avoid going home to Megan. My son. The boy I had raised, to be honest. The man who had become a shadow of himself. He sat on my sagging beige sofa and refused to make eye contact. I placed my black notebook on the coffee table between us. It was a simple ledger. Date, time, duration of entry, items disturbed. "Read it, Brandon," I said. He picked it up and flipped through the pages without reading a single word. He sighed. A long, suffering sigh that he had clearly practiced. "Dad, we have talked about this. Megan is just trying to help. She is worried about you. She is breaking and entering Brandon. She is searching my drawers. She is looking for money. Today she told me I was imagining it. She told me I was paranoid. And now you are not even reading the evidence." Brandon dropped the notebook back onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud. "Because it is not evidence, Dad. It is a list of your delusions. Megan tells me everything. She says you forget who she is sometimes. She says she found the stove left on last week. She says you called her by Mom's name." I felt a cold, sharp pain in my chest. It was not my heart condition. It was the realization that my son was gone. He had been replaced by this weak, apologetic creature who would sell his own father's dignity for a quiet night with his wife. I have never left the stove on. I have never called her Catherine. You know that. You know my mind is sharp. I still do the Sunday crossword in ink, Brandon. I still balance my own checkbook down to the penny. Why are you lying for her?" Brandon stood up. His face was flushed with a mix of anger and shame. "I am not lying. I am trying to manage a difficult situation. You are 71 years old, Dad. You live in a rent-controlled apartment that smells like dust. You have no assets. You have no future. We are trying to figure out what to do with you before you hurt yourself. Megan thinks we should look into assisted living facilities, places where professionals can deal with your episodes." Episodes. The word hung in the air like toxic smoke. They were building a narrative. They were constructing a legal case for incompetence. If they could prove I was senile, they could take power of attorney. They could control the little money they thought I had. I stood up and looked my son in the eye. He flinched. "I am not going to a home, Brandon, and I am not having episodes. I am telling you that your wife is a thief and a liar, and you are letting her do it because you are too weak to stand up to her." Brandon grabbed his jacket. "I am done listening to this. If you keep attacking Megan, we are going to have to take legal steps to protect you from yourself. We are doing this for your own good, Gerald. Don't make it ugly." He walked out. He slammed the door. I stood in the silence of my apartment. I looked at the notebook on the table. They thought I was a helpless old man clinging to his last few years of independence. They thought I was prey. I walked to the window and watched Brandon get into his car. He sat there for a moment, with his head on the steering wheel. I felt a moment of pity for him, but I crushed it. Pity gets you killed. Pity obscures the numbers. And right now, the numbers did not add up to a happy family reunion. They added up to a war. The next morning, the air in the apartment felt heavy. I woke up with the instinct of a man who knows his perimeter has been breached. I went through my morning routine. Coffee black, toast dry. I sat at my desk, which was really just a folding card table in the corner of the living room. I kept a stack of files there. Decoy files, papers labeled pension plan and medical records. I had arranged them in a specific geometric pattern the night before. One edge of the blue folder aligned perfectly with the corner of the table. The blue folder was moved. It was off by half an inch. Megan had come back in the night, or early morning. I had slept through it. That terrified me more than anything. I checked the contents. Nothing was missing from the papers. They were boring documents anyway. But then I looked at the small wooden box on the shelf above the table. It was a simple box made of cedar. Inside, I kept the only thing of true value in this apartment. My wife Catherine's pocket watch. It was broken. It had stopped ticking the day she died 5 years ago. It was silver tarnished and worthless to anyone else. But to me, it was the anchor to my past. I opened the box. It was empty. The rage that filled me was not hot. It was absolute zero. It was the cold clarity of a judge passing a death sentence. She had taken Catherine's watch. She hadn't taken it to sell. It wasn't worth $20. She had taken it to hurt me. She had taken it to make me look for it, to make me frantic, to make me prove to Brandon that I was losing things. I took out my phone. My fingers flew across the screen. "Return the watch, Megan. Now." The reply came 3 minutes later. "What watch, Badsy? You are spiraling. We never saw a watch. Maybe you threw it out with the trash like you did with your mail last week. Check the dumpster." I stared at the screen. She was taunting me. She was enjoying this. She thought she was the cat playing with a dying mouse. She thought I would run to the dumpster. She thought I would call Brandon screaming. She thought I would break. I did not reply. I put the phone down. I walked to the bookshelf. Nestled between a copy of tax codes from 1998 and a dusty encyclopedia was a small black device. It looked like a screw in the shelving unit. It was a high-definition wide-angle camera with motion activation and night vision. I had installed it after the 5th break-in. I had never checked it because I wanted to wait until I had enough for a criminal conviction, not just a family argument. But today was the day. I opened my laptop. I engaged the encryption software. I pulled up the feed from the previous night. The timestamp read 3:14 a.m. The door opened. Megan slipped inside. She wasn't wearing her daytime clothes. She was wearing black, trying to look like a shadow. She moved straight to the desk. She flipped through the blue folder. Then she reached up and took the watch from the cedar box. She held it up to the moonlight. She smiled. It was a cruel twist of her lips. She slipped the watch into her pocket. But she didn't leave. She pulled out her phone. She turned on the flashlight app. She opened the drawer of the desk where I kept my bank statements. My real bank statements. The ones for the checking account I used for bills. Not the big accounts, just the day-to-day money. She didn't steal them. She laid them out on the desk. She took photographs of every single page. She photographed my social security card. She photographed my driver's license. She photographed the deed to the burial plot next to Catherine. I froze the frame. Her face was illuminated by the glow of her phone screen. She looked hungry. She wasn't just gaslighting me anymore. She wasn't just trying to put me in a home. She was stealing my identity. She was building a profile to take control of every asset I had the moment I was declared incompetent. I leaned back in my chair. The anger settled into a hard knot in my stomach. They wanted to play games. They wanted to treat me like a senile fool. They wanted to strip me of my history and my dignity. I looked at the screen one last time. I saved the video file to an external drive. Then I saved it to a cloud server. Then I saved it to a second cloud server. You want the watch, Megan? You can keep the watch. Because you just gave me something much more valuable. You gave me a motive. You gave me evidence. And you gave me the permission to stop acting like a father and start acting like the man who brought down the Enron subsidiaries. I closed the laptop. I did not call Brandon. I did not text Megan. I went to the closet and pulled out my suit. The charcoal gray one. The one I hadn't worn in 5 years. I brushed the dust off the shoulders. I put on a crisp white shirt. I tied my tie with a perfect Windsor knot. I looked in the mirror. The tired old man was gone. Gerald O'Malley was back. It was time to visit Beatrice. It was time to open the gates of hell. The glass doors of the Sterling and Kowalski building reflected a man I had not seen in a long time. The charcoal suit fit a little looser than it used to, but the posture was the same. I walked past the security desk with a gaze that dared them to ask for ID. I did not stop at the reception on the 40th floor. The young man behind the marble counter started to stand up, his mouth opening to ask if I had an appointment, or perhaps if I was delivering lunch. I simply held up a hand and kept walking toward the corner office. I told him to tell Ms. Kowalski that the auditor was here. I knew he wouldn't make the call in time. I opened the heavy oak double doors without knocking. Beatrice Kowalski was standing by the window looking out over the Chicago skyline. She did not turn around immediately. She took a sip from a crystal tumbler and let the silence stretch. Beatrice was 60 years old and had a reputation that made grown CEOs weep in depositions. She was a shark in a silk blouse. She turned slowly. Her eyes narrowed and then widened just a fraction. "Jerry." She said my name like it was a ghost story. "I heard you retired. I heard you were living the simple life in a walk-up on the South Side, feeding pigeons, watching daytime television." I closed the door and locked it. The click echoed in the massive room. I was trying to be. I really was. But retirement does not seem to agree with my family. I sat in the leather chair opposite her desk. It cost more than the furniture in my entire apartment combined. I placed the flash drive on the polished mahogany surface. It looked small and insignificant against the vastness of her workspace. Beatrice sat down. She looked at the drive and then at me. "Is that financial or personal?" "It is criminal," I said. She plugged it into her laptop. I watched her face as the footage played. I knew exactly what she was seeing. She was seeing the timestamp. She was seeing the unauthorized entry. She was seeing the theft of the watch. But then she leaned forward. Her professional mask slipped. She saw Megan photographing the documents. Beatrice paused the video. She looked up at me with a sharpness that could cut glass. "She is not just stealing trinkets, Jerry. She is building a profile. That is identity theft. That is elder abuse. She is photographing your social security number and your deed. She is preparing to liquidate you." I nodded. I leaned back and crossed my legs. "I know. She thinks I am senile. She thinks I am a confused old man who forgets where he put his keys. She has spent 3 months gaslighting me, moving my papers, stealing small items, telling my son that I am losing my mind. She wants to put me in a home bee. She wants power of attorney." Beatrice took a drink. She slammed the glass down. "We can file a restraining order today. We can sue her for civil damages. I can have a sheriff at her door by sunset serving her with papers that will make her head spin. We can crush her financially, Jerry. We can make sure she never gets within 500 feet of you again." I shook my head. "No, that is not enough. A restraining order is a piece of paper. A civil suit is a negotiation. She will play the victim. She will cry to Brandon. She will tell the judge she was just trying to help her poor confused father-in-law. She will get a slap on the wrist, and I will spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder." I stood up and walked to the window. I looked down at the city. I remembered the last time I stood in this office. It was 10 years ago. We had just finished the audit on the Peterson account. I had found $40 million hidden in shell companies in the Cayman Islands. I didn't find it by looking at the bank statements. I found it by looking at the behavior of the CFO. I found it because I know how liars think. I am not a victim, Beatrice. You know what I used to do. You know who I am. Beatrice smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile. "You are the man who took down the Cartwright Ponzi scheme using nothing but their own expense reports. You are the forensic accountant who found the money the FBI missed." "Exactly." I turned back to her. "I do not want to sue her. I want to catch her. I want to build a case so airtight that she will not be able to breathe. I want felony charges. I want prison time. I want her to understand that she broke into the wrong house. Beatrice tapped her fingers on the desk. She was calculating. She was seeing the game board. If you want criminal charges, you need more than this. This video is good, but a good defense lawyer could argue she had implied consent. They could argue she was checking your finances to help you. We need intent. We need to prove she intended to steal substantial assets. We need to prove malice. I walked back to the desk. I lowered my voice. That is why I am here. I am not living in that apartment because I have to. You know I own the building. You set up the shell company for me 15 years ago. Beatrice nodded. O'Malley Holdings. You own the whole block. I do. But Megan doesn't know that. Brandon doesn't know that. They think I am a tenant. I am going to move out, B. I am going to move upstairs to the penthouse. But I am going to leave the apartment exactly as it is. And I am going to change the legal designation of Unit 4B. Beatrice raised an eyebrow. She was listening intently now. Change it to what? Change it from a residential unit to a private document storage facility for O'Malley Holdings. I want you to draw up the paperwork today. I want signs posted inside the apartment that are visible only once you enter. Signs that say restricted access, federal records. I want to bait the trap. I explained the plan. I explained the safe I was going to leave behind. I explained the rumors I was going to plant about the cash. Beatrice listened. Her eyes lit up. She saw the beauty of it. If Megan broke into a home to check on an old man, it was a domestic dispute. If she broke into a commercial storage facility to drill into a safe after being denied access, it was grand larceny and corporate espionage. It was a federal offense. You are a cruel man, Jerry, Beatrice said softly. I am a father who has just realized he raised a coward and married him off to a predator, I replied. I have spent my life finding the truth in the numbers. The numbers told me that my family is insolvent, morally and financially. I am just closing the account. Beatrice opened her laptop. She started typing. I will draft the lease agreement between you and the holding company. We will date it effective tomorrow. We will notify the precinct that the unit contains sensitive financial data. If she breaks in after you vacate, she is not visiting Grandpa. She is robbing a vault. I watched her work. I felt a cold satisfaction. This was familiar territory. This was not the messy, emotional chaos of family arguments. This was law. This was cause and effect. This was a balance sheet. Megan had created a debt. I was about to collect. Beatrice looked up from her screen. What about Brandon? He is your son, Jerry. If he is with her when she goes down, he goes down too. I felt a twitch in my jaw. I thought of Brandon sitting on my couch, refusing to look at the evidence. I thought of him telling me I was having episodes. I thought of him choosing the path of least resistance because he was afraid of his wife. I gave him a chance. I showed him the book. I told him the truth. He chose her. If he stands by the fire, he is going to get burned. I cannot save someone who refuses to grab the rope. Beatrice nodded. She understood. In our line of work, you learned that you cannot save everyone. Sometimes you have to let the structure collapse to clear the rot. One more thing, I said. I need a team. I need the police ready. I don't want a patrol car showing up 20 minutes late to take a report. I want them caught in the act. I want the handcuffs on their wrists before they leave the room. Beatrice picked up her phone. I will call Captain George. He owes me a favor from the union's case. He hates thieves, especially thieves who prey on the elderly. He will appreciate the irony. She paused and looked at me. You realize once we do this, there is no going back. You are sending your daughter-in-law to prison. You are destroying your son's marriage. You will be alone. I stood up and buttoned my jacket. I looked at the reflection in the window. I saw the old man Megan saw, but beneath that I saw the shark. I have been alone since Catherine died, B. I just didn't realize it until I saw Megan weighing my heart medication to see if I was dead yet. I am not destroying a family. I am removing a tumor. I walked to the door. Get the papers ready. I am moving out tomorrow morning. And Beatrice. She looked up. Make sure the lease agreement specifies that the tenant keeps highly confidential tax records on the premises. Let's make sure the charge carries a mandatory minimum sentence. Beatrice smiled. Consider it done. Welcome back to the game, Jerry. I walked out of the office. The air in the hallway felt cooler. My heart beat with a steady, rhythmic thud. I was not sad anymore. I was not confused. I was operational. I had a target. I had a plan. And tomorrow morning I would set the stage for the final act. Megan wanted my money. She wanted my legacy. She was about to find out exactly what that legacy was worth. Beatrice stared at me across the expanse of her mahogany desk, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She blinked once slowly, as if trying to process a data error in a spreadsheet. You own the building, Jerry. She repeated the words without inflection. You own the entire Sterling Heights complex, the building where your daughter-in-law thinks you are a charity case. I nodded and took a sip of the sparkling water she had offered. It was cool and crisp against the dryness in my throat. I bought it in '98, Beatrice. It was a distressed asset. The developers had overextended themselves on marble lobbies and under-delivered on structural integrity. I picked it up for pennies on the dollar through a blind trust. O'Malley Holdings is the parent company, but I doubt Megan has ever looked past the surface of anything in her life. To her, I am just the old man in 4B who pays rent with a money order every month. She doesn't know I am paying myself. Beatrice leaned back in her chair, a slow smile spreading across her face. It was the smile of a predator recognizing another apex hunter. She tapped a key and a new document appeared on her screen. So let me get this straight. You want to vacate the unit, but keep it under lease. No, I corrected her. I do not want to lease it. I want to repurpose it. I want you to draft a corporate resolution right now. Effective immediately, Unit 4B is no longer a residential dwelling. It is a secure archives facility for O'Malley Holdings. We are going to store sensitive financial records there. Hard copies of tax returns, audit trails, the kind of documents that require federal compliance levels of security. Beatrice's eyes widened. She began to type her nails, clicking a rhythmic staccato on the keys. I watched the words form on the screen reflected in her glasses. She was drafting a death warrant, disguised as a commercial zoning change. If we do that, Jerry. She spoke without stopping her typing. We change the nature of the crime. If she breaks into a home, it is burglary. If she breaks into a commercial archive secured with federal warning signs and attempts to access a safe containing tax records, she is looking at corporate espionage and aggravated identity theft. We are talking about federal jurisdiction. We are talking about mandatory minimum sentencing. That is the point, I said softly. Point. I want the stakes to be so high that she gets a nosebleed just standing in the hallway. I want you to include a clause about proprietary trade secrets. Make the valuation of the stored documents explicitly clear. If she touches that safe, I want the law to treat it like she broke into the Federal Reserve. Beatrice stopped typing. She swiveled her chair to face me. The amusement was gone from her face, replaced by a hard, professional gravity. Jerry, listen to me. This is nuclear. If she walks into that room with a screwdriver and a bad attitude, she is not going to county jail for a weekend. She is going to prison for a decade. And Brandon, if he is holding the flashlight or standing lookout, he goes down as an accomplice. You are building a trap that could destroy your son. I stood up and walked to the wall of diplomas behind her desk. I looked at the framed degrees, the awards, the photos of her with governors and senators. Beatrice had built a legacy. I had built a legacy too, and I was watching mine being dismantled by a woman who thought kindness was weakness. Brandon made his choice, Beatrice. I replied without turning around. I called him. I showed him the evidence. I gave him the chance to be a husband and a son. He chose to be a doormat. He chose to let his wife rummage through my medicine cabinet to see if I was dying fast enough. If he follows her into that room, he is not a victim. He is a volunteer. I turned back to face her. My voice dropped an octave. Do you know what she said to me yesterday, B.A.? She told me I was lucky she visited at all. She told me I was a burden. She looked at me with eyes that calculated my net worth based on the furniture in a room I pretended to rent. She doesn't just want my money. She wants to erase me. She wants to declare me incompetent so she can sign the checks herself. This is not a prank. This is self-defense. Beatrice sighed. It was a heavy sound that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 plea bargains. She turned back to the screen and hit the enter key with a decisive snap. Fine. The resolution is drafted. O'Malley Holdings designates Unit 4B as a Level 3 secure storage facility. I will have the signage printed within the hour. You need to put them up the second you move your furniture out. High visibility. Warning: restricted access. Authorized personnel only. She printed the document. The laser printer hummed in the corner, churning out the pages that would seal Megan's fate. Beatrice handed them to me still warm. Sign here as chairman of the board, and here as the tenant surrendering the lease. I signed. The ink flowed smoothly. It felt like signing a treaty to end a long and bloody war. Now, Beatrice said, stacking the papers neatly, we need to talk about the bait. You said you are leaving a safe. Yes, a vintage, formidable-looking steel safe. I bought it at an auction years ago. It looks like it could hold the crown jewels. I am going to bolt it to the floor in the center of the living room. And what goes inside, Jerry? Beatrice asked, her eyes sharp. If the police open it, they need to find something that justifies the felony charge. You can't just leave a ham sandwich in there. I smiled. It was a cold expression that felt tight on my face. I am putting the dummy ledgers from the 2008 audit inside. They look official. They are stamped confidential. And I am putting a GPS tracker in the lining. But on top of the stack, I am going to leave a single file folder labeled The Estate of Gerald O'Malley. Inside that folder, I will put a printout of my actual bank balance. Just the total. Not the account numbers. Just the bottom line. Beatrice raised an eyebrow. Why? Because I want her to see it. I want her to know exactly what she lost the moment before the handcuffs click. I want the last thing she sees as a free woman to be the number she was so desperate to find. It is the only inheritance she is ever going to get. Beatrice shook her head, a mixture of horror and admiration on her face. You are a cold bastard, Jerry. I am a forensic accountant, B. I believe in transparency. She handed me a second set of documents. This is the lease for the penthouse. Unit 40A, top floor, private elevator access. You can move in tonight. The security system up there is state-of-the-art. You can monitor the cameras in Unit 4B from your living room television. I took the keys. They were heavy brass real keys, not the flimsy plastic cards they gave the other tenants. They felt substantial. Thank you, Beatrice. Send the bill to the holding company and add a hazard pay surcharge. You have earned it. I walked to the door, but Beatrice stopped me one last time. Jerry, wait. I turned. She was looking at me with a softness I rarely saw. If you do this, there is no Christmas dinner. There are no birthday parties. You are cutting the cord. Are you sure you can live with the silence? I thought about the silence in my apartment after Megan left the door open. I thought about the silence of Brandon looking at the floor while his wife called me senile. That was the silence of the grave. The silence of the penthouse would be the silence of peace. I have lived in noise for too long, B. I think I will enjoy the quiet. I left her office and stepped into the elevator. As the numbers ticked down toward the lobby, I felt the weight of the plan settling onto my shoulders. It was heavy, but it was solid. It was real. I was done being the victim. I was done being the confused old man. I was the architect of my own life again. I walked out into the Chicago afternoon. The wind was biting cold, but I didn't button my coat. I needed to feel it. I needed to feel alive. I hailed a cab and gave the driver the address of a hardware store. I needed bolts, heavy industrial bolts, the kind that anchor a safe to the floor so securely that you would need a jackhammer to move it. Megan wanted to find buried treasure. She wanted to crack the code of Gerald O'Malley. I was going to give her exactly what she wanted. I was going to give her a puzzle she couldn't solve and a prize she couldn't keep. I sat back in the cab and watched the city blur past. The game was set. The pieces were moving. And tomorrow morning, the trap would be armed. All she had to do was reach for it. And I knew Megan. I knew her greed like I knew the tax code. She wouldn't be able to help herself. She would reach. And the moment she did, the steel jaws would snap shut. I walked back into the apartment at 4 in the afternoon. The air inside felt stale, recycled, and heavy with the ghosts of the life I was about to abandon. I did not take off my coat. I did not loosen my tie. I was not staying long enough to get comfortable. I was only here to deliver a performance. I walked to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. I stood by the sink and looked out at the brick wall of the adjacent building. I took a deep breath. This had to be perfect. It had to be loud enough to be heard, but private enough to sound like a secret. I knew she was there. I did not need to see her car. I did not need to smell her cheap vanilla perfume. I felt her presence like a drop in barometric pressure. She was likely in the hallway pressing her ear against the wood, or perhaps she had let herself into the vacant unit across the hall, which I knew she used as a listening post. I had seen the scratches on the lock. She was a creature of habit, and her habit was surveillance. She wanted to know when I died, so she could be the first to find the wallet. Today, I was going to give her something better than a death certificate. I was going to give her a reason to risk everything. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I dialed the number for the automated weather service. It was a safe, neutral background noise for me to speak over. I held the phone to my ear and walked into the living room. I positioned myself near the front door. Not too close. Just close enough that a voice raised in agitation would carry through the gaps in the frame. I cleared my throat and let the old man slide over me. I hunched my shoulders. I let a tremor enter my hand. I became the paranoid, confused geriatric she wanted me to be. "Listen to me, Mr. Henderson," I said loudly, my voice pitching up into a quaver of frustration. "I do not care about the early withdrawal penalties. I do not care about the FDIC insurance. I am done with banks. I saw the news. I know what is happening. The economy is crashing, and I am not going to let you people freeze my assets." I paused, leaving space for the imaginary banker to protest. I paced a tight circle on the rug, letting my shoes scuff the floor. I wanted her to hear the pacing. I wanted her to hear the anxiety. "No," I shouted at the empty room. "No, you listen. I want to close the high-yield savings account. Yes, the one from 1998. I want it all in cash. Do not look at me like that. I know how much is in there. $500,000. I let the number hang in the air. 500,000. $500,000. It was a number that would change Megan's life. It was a number that would pay off her credit cards, buy her a new car, and fuel her delusions of grandeur for at least a year. It was the specific number I had chosen because it was high enough to induce madness, but low enough to be plausible for a man who had worked 40 years. I walked closer to the door. I stared at the brass knob, imagining her ear on the other side. I want it ready by tomorrow morning. I am moving the safe to the apartment tonight. Yes, the big steel one. I am going to keep it right here where I can see it. I do not trust you. I do not trust the government. I am taking my money and I am guarding it myself. I listened to the drone of the weather report in my ear. Partly cloudy with a chance of rain. It was fitting. A storm was definitely coming. I continued the charade. I will be there at 9 sharp. Have the bills in hundreds. And do not call my son. This is my money. He does not need to know. He is weak. His wife would spend it on shoes. This is my retirement. This is my safety net. I hung up the phone with a violent stab of my finger. I threw it onto the sofa cushion. I stood there panting slightly, not from exertion, but from the sheer adrenaline of the lie. It was out there now. The bait was in the water. The blood trail was laid. I moved quickly to the bookshelf. I pulled out my laptop and opened the secure feed from the hidden camera I had installed in the hallway light fixture 3 days ago. It was a fisheye lens, giving me a distorted but clear view of the corridor outside apartment 4B. There she was. Megan was standing pressed against the wall next to my door. She was not even trying to hide. Her head was tilted, her eyes wide and unblinking. She looked like a junkie who had just found a bag of heroin on the sidewalk. Her chest was heaving. I could see the greed washing over her in physical waves. It distorted her face, pulling her lips back from her teeth. She pulled her phone from her pocket. Her fingers flew across the screen. She was texting Brandon. I knew exactly what she was typing. He has $500,000 in cash. He is bringing it here. We have to get it. She looked at my door one last time. Her hand reached out, hovering over the knob. For a second, I thought she might try to break in right then and there. I tensed, ready to confront her, ready to ruin the plan if necessary. But she pulled her hand back. She was greedy, but she was not stupid. She knew she couldn't take a safe that wasn't there yet. She knew she had to wait for the money to arrive. She turned and ran down the hallway toward the stairs. She moved with a speed I had never seen in her before. She was energized. She was motivated. She had a purpose now. She wasn't just checking on a senile old man anymore. She was planning a heist. I closed the laptop. I felt a wave of nausea. It was one thing to suspect your family was mercenary. It was another thing to watch them salivate over your imaginary fortune, like wolves circling a wounded deer. She hadn't hesitated. She hadn't thought about my safety. She hadn't worried that carrying that much cash might be dangerous for me. She only saw the payday. I went to the bedroom and packed the last few items into my small suitcase. My toothbrush, a photo of Catherine, the notebook where I had recorded her crimes. I looked around the apartment. It was stripped bare of anything personal. It looked cold. It looked like a storage unit. I walked back to the living room. I looked at the spot where the safe would go. The heavy bolts I had bought were sitting on the table. The drill was charged. Tomorrow morning, the movers would bring the beast up the freight elevator. I would bolt it down. I would fill it with the dummy files. And then I would disappear upstairs to the penthouse. I checked the camera feed one last time. The hallway was empty. But I knew she was out there. She was probably in her car screaming at Brandon, telling him that their ship had finally come in. She was probably calculating how to spend the money before she even stole it. I put on my coat. I picked up my suitcase. I walked to the door and unlocked it. I stepped out into the hallway and locked it behind me. The click of the deadbolt sounded final. I did not take the elevator. I walked up the stairs. 1 flight. 2 flights, 10 flights. I needed the burn in my legs. I needed to remember that I was strong. By the time I reached the 40th floor, I was breathing hard, but I felt clean. I keyed into the private elevator lobby of the penthouse. The doors slid open, revealing a world of marble and glass and silence. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked down at the city. Somewhere down there in the maze of streets, Megan was plotting. She was making plans. She was buying tools. Let her come. I whispered to the glass. I poured myself a glass of vintage scotch. I sat in the Eames chair that faced the monitors I had set up on the wall. One screen showed the hallway of 4B. Another showed the interior of the living room. The trap was armed. The bait was set. I took a sip of the scotch. It burned pleasantly. I thought about the phone call. I thought about the lie. $500,000. It was a lot of money to most people. But the lesson I was about to teach her was going to cost her so much more than that. It was going to cost her freedom. I watched the empty hallway on the monitor. The stage was set for the final act. I settled in to wait. The spider does not hunt the fly. The spider weaves the web and waits for the fly to destroy itself. And Megan was flying straight for the center. The movers arrived at 4:45 in the morning. They were not the scruffy college students you hire with pizza and beer to move a futon. These were men on the payroll of O'Malley Holdings. They wore gray coveralls with no logos. They moved with the silent efficiency of a tactical team. They knew me only as the chairman. They did not ask why I was living in a crumbling one-bedroom apartment with water stains on the ceiling. They did not ask why I needed a steel safe bolted to the floor of a room I was vacating. They simply did the work. I stood in the corner of the living room drinking my last cup of coffee from the cheap machine I had bought at a thrift store. I watched them wheel the safe in. It was a beast. An antique Diebold from the 1920s, black iron and brass dials weighing nearly 800 pounds. It looked like it belonged in a bank vault or a noir film. It looked like it held secrets. Center of the room, I directed them. Bolt it to the joists. I want it immovable. One of the men brought out a heavy-duty impact drill. The sound of the bolts driving into the subfloor was a violent mechanical scream that vibrated through the soles of my shoes. It was the sound of a cage locking. When they were finished, the safe sat there like a monolith. It dominated the empty room. It screamed value. It screamed importance. I walked over to it. I spun the dial. The tumblers clicked with a satisfying precision. I opened the heavy door. The interior smelled of oil and cold steel. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the bait. First, the dummy ledgers, thick leather-bound books filled with rows of meaningless numbers that looked incredibly important to the untrained eye. I stacked them neatly. Then I placed the small black box in the back corner. The GPS tracker. It was active. It was blinking a slow, steady red light. If this safe moved an inch, I would know. Finally, I placed the manila folder on top. Estate of Gerald O'Malley. Confidential. Inside was the single sheet of paper with the account balance. It was the cheese in the mousetrap. I closed the door. I spun the dial. I locked it. Next came the signage. Beatrice had sent them over by courier late last night. They were not handwritten notes. They were official laminated placards mandated by federal compliance standards for secure document storage. I taped the first one to the front of the safe. Warning: restricted access. Federal tax records. Property of O'Malley Holdings archives. I taped the second one to the inside of the front door at eye level. No trespassing. Authorized personnel only. Violators will be prosecuted under Title 18 U.S. Code. It changed the room. With the furniture gone and the safe sitting there in the stark morning light, the apartment no longer looked like a home. It looked like a black site. It looked like a place where secrets went to die. The movers cleared out the rest of my decoy life. The sagging sofa, the scratched dining table, the boxes of old clothes I never wore. They took them down the freight elevator to the disposal truck. I did not feel a pang of nostalgia. I felt like a snake shedding a dry, itchy skin. I took one last look around. The dust motes danced in the shaft of light coming through the dirty window. I saw the scuff marks on the floor where Megan had paced. I saw the scratch on the lock she had picked. This apartment had been my prison cell for 3 years. A prison of my own making designed to test the character of my son. He had failed the test. Now it was an execution chamber. I walked out and locked the door. I didn't leave the key under the mat. I didn't give it to the super. I put it in my pocket. I walked down the hall to the service elevator. The movers held the door for me. One of them pressed his key card against the sensor panel. A button lit up that no other tenant in the building could access. PH. The elevator rose. It bypassed the 5th floor, the 10th, the 20th. My ears popped. The vibration of the cables was a low hum. I was ascending. I was leaving the underworld of Gerald the pensioner and rising to the Olympus of Gerald the chairman. The doors slid open directly into the foyer of the penthouse. The transition was jarring. Downstairs, the air smelled of boiled cabbage and old carpet. Up here, the air was scrubbed clean, filtered, and scented with white tea. My shoes clicked on Italian marble. The light was different here. It was brighter, clearer. I walked into the main living area. It was a space of glass and steel suspended in the sky. The furniture was minimal, modern, and fiercely expensive. A Steinway piano sat in the corner untouched. I walked to the wall of windows that offered a 360-degree view of Chicago. The city looked like a circuit board from up here. Orderly, logical, controllable. I went to the command center I had set up in the study. A bank of high-definition monitors glowed on the wall. I sat in the ergonomic chair and typed in my passcodes. Screen 1 showed the hallway of the 4th floor. It was empty. The door to 4B stood closed and silent. Screen 2 showed the interior of 4B. The safe sat there brooding in the center of the frame. The infrared camera made it glow with a ghostly heat signature. I was the eye in the sky. I was God looking down on his creation, and I was waiting for the sinners to arrive. I pulled my phone from my pocket. It was time to sever the last tie. It was time to give them the green light. I composed a text to Brandon. I kept it short. I kept it pathetic. Brandon, I cannot stay here anymore. The city is too loud. I am moving to the country to live with Aunt Sally. Do not come looking for me. I need to be alone with my thoughts. The apartment is empty. I left the key inside. Goodbye. I hit send. I watched the screen. I waited. Aunt Sally. My mother's sister. She had died of a stroke in 1999. Brandon had been at the funeral. He was 12 years old. He had carried a wreath. If he cared about me, if he knew anything about my life or my history, he would know that Aunt Sally was dead. He would know that I was either lying or having a complete mental breakdown. He would call the police. He would call hospitals. He would panic because his father was claiming to live with a ghost. I watched the phone. 1 minute passed. 2 minutes. The reply came. Okay, Dad. Whatever you want. Stay safe. He didn't remember. Or he didn't care. He just saw an open door. He just saw an obstacle removing itself. I put the phone down on the glass desk. The vibration of the notification had barely ceased when I saw movement on monitor 1. It was 9 o'clock in the morning. The elevator doors on the 4th floor opened. Megan stepped out. She wasn't walking. She was practically running. She was wearing workout clothes, a hoodie pulled up over her head. She looked over her shoulder. She looked at my door. Brandon stumbled out of the elevator behind her, looking pale and sick. She had the text. She knew I was gone. She thought the apartment was empty. She thought the money was sitting there waiting for her. I leaned forward in my chair 40 floors above them. I took a sip of the espresso the automatic machine had just brewed. It was bitter and hot. "Go ahead, Megan," I whispered to the screen. "Knock." She didn't knock. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a key. A key she shouldn't have. A copy of a copy. She jammed it into the lock. She twisted it. It didn't turn. I had changed the cylinder 3 hours ago. On the screen, I saw her face contort. She rattled the handle. She kicked the door. She turned to Brandon and screamed something I couldn't hear, but I could read her lips perfectly. He changed the locks. He changed the damn locks. Brandon put his hands on his head. He wanted to leave. He wanted to go home. But Megan wasn't leaving. She stared at the door as if she could burn through the wood with her eyes. She pulled out her phone. She started typing. She wasn't texting me. She was looking for a locksmith. I sat back. The first pawn had been moved. The night was blocked. Now she would have to get creative. Now she would have to break the law in a way that couldn't be explained away as a family wellness check. I watched her pace the hallway like a caged tiger. I watched my son lean against the wall, defeated by his own apathy. Welcome to the penthouse view, Brandon. It is a long way down. I sat in the ergonomic leather chair of my command center 40 floors above the street. The coffee in my hand was perfectly hot. The silence in the penthouse was absolute. It was a silence money bought. A silence that insulated me from the desperate scratching of the creatures below. On the central monitor, the feed from the hallway camera on the 4th floor played out in high definition. It was like watching a nature documentary about scavengers fighting over a carcass, except the carcass was my life savings and the scavengers were my family. Megan was vibrating. That is the only word for it. She stood in front of door 4B with her hands clenched into fists at her sides. The key that had failed to turn was still in her hand. She stared at the lock as if it were a personal insult. She looked at the brushed steel faceplate of the new deadbolt I had installed. It was a Medico Maxim, drill-resistant, pick-resistant. It was a lock that said no. She turned to Brandon. On the screen, I could see the spittle flying from her mouth as she screamed. The audio feed was crisp, picking up every syllable of her rage. "Do something, Brandon," she shrieked. "Don't just stand there like a statue. Break it down. Kick it in." Brandon looked at the door. He looked at his wife. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had been carrying a heavy stone uphill for 10 years and had just been told he was only halfway to the top. "I can't kick it in, Megan," he said, his voice flat and hopeless. "Look at it. It's a solid core door with a steel frame. Dad must have reinforced it. He said he was worried about security." Megan laughed. It was a sound that scraped against the microphone. "Security. He's a paranoid old bat who thinks the government is coming for his imaginary millions. He probably forgot how to use a key. He's probably in there right now counting his pills and drooling." She hammered her fist against the wood. "Gerald, open this door. It's Megan. We know you're in there." Silence from the apartment. Of course there was silence. It was empty. The safe was the only occupant silently broadcasting its location to my server upstairs. She turned back to the lock. She grabbed the handle and rattled it violently, throwing her entire body weight against the door. It didn't budge, not even a millimeter. "He said he left the key inside." She hissed. "He texted you. He said the apartment was empty and the key was inside. Why would he change the lock if he was leaving?" Brandon leaned against the wall, sliding down until he was crouching on his heels. He put his head in his hands. "Maybe he took the money with him, Megan. Maybe there is no money. Maybe he just snapped and left." Megan rounded on him. She loomed over him, her shadow falling across his slumped figure. Don't be stupid. She spat the words. You heard him on the phone. $500,000 in cash. He ordered a safe. I saw the delivery truck this morning, Brandon. I saw them wheel a massive steel box into this building. He can't move that by himself. He can't carry $500,000 in a suitcase without having a heart attack. It is in there. It is sitting on the floor waiting for us, and you are going to help me get it. Brandon looked up. His eyes were red. This is wrong. If he moved out, we should just leave it alone. We can't break into his apartment. That's burglary. Megan crouched down until her face was inches from his. I zoomed in the camera. I wanted to see the love in her eyes. There was none. There was only calculation. We have $70,000 in credit card debt, Brandon. They are going to repossess the car next week. We are 3 months behind on rent. If we don't get that money, we are on the street. Do you understand? We are homeless. Your father owes us this. He has been hoarding wealth while we starve. He has been sitting on a fortune while you work yourself to death for pennies. It is not burglary. It is an advance on your inheritance. I took a sip of coffee. Work himself to death. Brandon worked 20 hours a week as a freelance consultant, which mostly involved playing video games and waiting for me to wire him money. But in Megan's narrative, they were the victims. They were the martyrs. Brandon shook his head weakly. He's not dead, Megan. There is no inheritance yet. Megan stood up and smoothed her tracksuit. Her face settled into a mask of cold determination. He might as well be. He went to the country to die with a ghost. He abandoned this place. Possession is 9/10 of the law. If we get inside and find the cash, it's ours. No one knows it exists. He told the bank not to call you. He hid it from the government. It's untraceable, Brandon. It's a ghost pile. And we are going to take it. She pulled out her phone again. She started scrolling. I called a locksmith an hour ago. He said he wouldn't touch it without proof of ownership. Coward. She paced the length of the hallway. 3 steps one way, 3 steps back. She was like a tiger in a zoo, pacing the fence line, looking for a weakness in the wire. She stopped in front of the door again. She ran her hand over the frame, searching for a hidden key, searching for a loose hinge. Nothing. We need tools, she said suddenly. Brandon looked up. What? We need a crowbar, a heavy one, and bolt cutters, and maybe a drill. If we can't pick the lock, we destroy it. We come back at night, when the building is quiet, when the doorman is asleep. Brandon stood up. He looked terrified. Megan, no. That's breaking and entering. That's a felony. If we get caught, if we don't get that money, my life is over. She screamed it. Her voice cracked. For a second, I saw the fear behind the greed. She was desperate. She had built a house of cards on a foundation of lies and spending, and it was collapsing. She needed that money not just to buy things, but to breathe. She grabbed Brandon by the lapels of his jacket and shoved him against the wall. You are going to help me. You are going to drive me to the hardware store. You are going to buy the tools. And tonight, you are going to stand watch while I get what belongs to us. Or so help me God. Brandon, I will leave you. I will walk away and leave you with the debt and the shame, and you will never see me again. Brandon stared at her. I watched my son weigh his morality against his fear of loneliness. I watched him weigh his father against his wife. It wasn't even a contest. The scale tipped instantly. His shoulders sagged. The fight went out of him. Okay, he whispered. Okay. We'll go to the store. Megan released him. She patted his cheek. It was a gesture of ownership, not affection. Good boy. Now let's go. We have work to do. She turned and marched toward the elevator without looking back. Brandon lingered for a moment. He looked at the door of apartment 4B. He reached out and touched the wood gently, almost reverently. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered. Then he turned and followed her. I watched them get into the elevator. I watched the doors close on their faces. I sat in the silence of the penthouse and felt a profound hollowness in my chest. He had apologized. He knew it was wrong. He knew he was crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. And he did it anyway. He was sorry. But he was going to bring the crowbar. I turned off the monitor for the hallway and switched the main screen to the interior of apartment 4B. The safe sat there in the gloom, its red GPS light blinking slowly like a heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump. It was waiting for them. The bait was set. The trap was primed. They were going to the hardware store to buy the instruments of their own destruction. I picked up my phone and dialed Beatrice. "They just left," I said, my voice steady. "They are going to buy tools. They are coming back tonight. Tell the captain to have his team ready by 2 a.m. Beatrice didn't ask how I knew. She knew I was watching. "Is Brandon with her?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "He is driving the car." There was a pause on the line. "I'm sorry, Jerry." "Don't be," I replied, closing my eyes for a brief second. He just signed his resignation letter from the family. Let's make sure the severance package is delivered promptly. I hung up, I stood and walked to the window. The city below was waking up. Millions of people going about their lives, earning their livings, making their choices. Down there, somewhere, my son and his wife were buying a pry bar. I would be ready. I would be watching. And when they broke that seal, they would find out that the only thing in that safe was the truth. And the truth, as they say, will set you free. But first, it will put you in handcuffs. The sun began to dip behind the steel canyons of the city, casting long purple shadows across the floor of the penthouse. I sat in the dark, illuminated only by the cool blue glow of the monitor array. I had not moved from the chair for hours. I was a sentinel. I was a ghost haunting my own building. The silence up here was profound, but on the screen, the drama was playing out in grainy silence. At 5:45, Megan played her last card before violence. She returned to the hallway, not with a crowbar, but with a man in greasy coveralls carrying a heavy tool bag. A locksmith, not a reputable one. I ran a quick search on the logo on his shirt. Al's 24-hour unlock, 1-star reviews, known for overcharging and asking 0 questions. Perfect for Megan. I zoomed in. I watched them argue in the hallway. Megan was gesturing wildly, pointing at the door. She was spinning a lie I could almost hear through the screen. My father is sick inside. He locked himself in. We lost the key. The locksmith looked bored. He knelt down to inspect the lock. I leaned forward. This was the test of the hardware. I had installed a Medeco Maxim deadbolt. It is the kind of lock they use on embassies. It is pick-resistant, drill-resistant, and terrifying to an amateur. The locksmith took one look at the keyway. He ran his thumb over the hardened steel faceplate. He stood up and shook his head. I saw him mouth the words, "Cannot do it." Megan grabbed his arm. She pulled a wad of cash from her purse. It was my money, probably withdrawn from an ATM using the last of the credit limit. She tried to shove it into his pocket. The locksmith backed away. He pointed at the camera in the light fixture. He had spotted it. He wasn't stupid. He knew a commercial-grade security setup when he saw one. He knew that breaking into a unit secured like Fort Knox wasn't worth $500. He picked up his bag and walked to the elevator, leaving Megan standing there with a fistful of cash and a face twisted in impotent rage. She kicked the door. She kicked it so hard I thought she might break a toe. Then she turned to Brandon, who was leaning against the opposite wall, looking like a man waiting for a firing squad. She screamed something at him. He nodded. They got into the elevator. The diplomatic phase was over. Now came the brute force. 2 hours later, they returned. This time, they were not empty-handed. I watched them wrestle a long, heavy package out of the elevator. It was wrapped in brown paper, but the shape was unmistakable. A 36-inch wrecking bar. A tool designed for demolition. A tool designed to tear wood from frames and steel from concrete. Brandon was carrying a pair of bolt cutters. They looked heavy in his hands. He looked like a child playing soldier with real weapons. They didn't go to the door immediately. They went into the vacant unit across the hall. I had left it unlocked, knowing they used it as a staging ground. They were going to wait. They were going to wait until the building slept, until the doorman was on his break, until they thought the world wasn't watching. I picked up the phone. It was time to make the call. I dialed a private number. It rang twice. "Chief," I said. "Gerald." The voice on the other end was gravel and smoke. "George Miller, Chief of Police for the precinct." We had played poker together every Thursday for 10 years before Catherine got sick. He was a good man who had seen too much bad in the world. "I haven't heard from you in a year. Is everything all right?" I looked at the monitor. I looked at the wrecking bar leaning against the wall in the vacant apartment across the hall. "No, George, it isn't, but it is about to be. I have a situation at the Sterling Heights building." I told him everything. I didn't dress it up. I gave him the facts, just like I used to give the district attorney the numbers. I told him about the break-ins. I told him about the identity theft. I told him about the safe and the trap. I told him that in a few hours, 2 suspects were going to attempt a forcible entry into a unit designated as a secure corporate archive. George listened. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. "Your own son, Jerry?" he asked heavily. "My own son," I confirmed. "He is driving the getaway car, George. He is holding the bolt cutters." I heard the scratch of a match and the exhale of smoke. George was thinking. "If I send a team in there, Jerry, we are talking felony charges. We are talking armed burglary if they have a crowbar. That is a weapon in the eyes of the law. Once the cuffs go on, I can't take them off just because you get cold feet. The DA will eat this up. It is a slam dunk." I looked at the image of Brandon on the screen. He was sitting on the floor of the vacant unit, staring at the wall. He looked lost. But he was there. He had made his choice. "I won't get cold feet, George. I want them caught in the act. I want them inside the unit. I want her hand on the safe. I want the charges to stick so hard that she will need a chisel to get them off." "All right," George said. "I will send a tactical unit. No sirens. We will come in silent. We will secure the perimeter at 1 a.m. "When do you think they will move?" 2 a.m., I said. "That is when the night shift doorman takes his lunch break. She knows the schedule. She watches everything. 2 a.m. it is. I will be there personally, Jerry. I want to see this." "Thank you, George. Don't thank me. You are doing the hard part. I am just taking out the trash." I hung up. The sun was completely gone now. The city outside was a grid of electric light. I felt a strange sense of detachment. I was observing a train wreck in slow motion. I had laid the tracks, I had built the engine, but they were the ones shoveling the coal. I watched the screen for hours. They sat in the dark across the hall. They ate sandwiches from a gas station. They argued in whispers. I could see Megan pacing again. She was agitated. She was checking her watch every 3 minutes. She was fueled by a toxic mix of adrenaline and avarice. She was thinking about the money. She was spending it in her head. $500,000. It was enough to fix everything. It was enough to bury the mistakes. She didn't know that the only thing she was going to find in that safe was a mirror. At 1:30 in the morning, I saw movement on the street below. Two unmarked vans pulled up to the service entrance. Men in dark uniforms stepped out. They moved like shadows. George's team. They were entering the stairwell. They were moving into position. My heart began to beat a little faster. Not from fear, but from finality. This was it. The point of no return. I switched the audio feed on. I wanted to hear them. I wanted to hear the justification. Megan stood up. She picked up the crowbar. She weighed it in her hands. "It is time," she whispered. Brandon stood up. He picked up the bolt cutters. He looked like he was going to be sick. "Megan," he said, "we can still go. We can just leave. We can drive away." Megan turned on him. Her eyes were black holes in the night vision camera. "And go where, Brandon? To the shelter? To the bankruptcy court?" "No. We are going into that room. We are getting that money. And tomorrow we are going to be rich. Now move." She pushed him toward the door. I sat back in my chair. I took a deep breath. "Come on in, Megan," I said to the empty room. "The bank is open." The digital clock on my wall flipped to 2:00. It was the hour of the wolf. The hour when good people were asleep and desperate people made mistakes that would define the rest of their lives. On the monitor, the hallway was bathed in the grainy green light of the night vision camera. The door to the vacant unit across the hall opened slowly. It was not a stealthy movement. It was the heavy, reluctant push of a man who knew he was walking toward a cliff. Megan stepped out first. She wore black gloves, the kind you buy in a multi-pack at a gas station. In her right hand, she gripped the wrecking bar. It was a cold piece of hexagonal steel, 36 inches long, heavy enough to kill a man or pry a house off its foundation. She moved with a jerky, frantic energy. Her head snapped left, then right, checking for the elevator, checking for the ghost of a witness. There was no one. Just the silent lens of my camera watching her every twitch. Brandon followed her. He carried the bolt cutters across his chest like a holy relic he was afraid to drop. He was sweating. I could see the sheen on his forehead, even in the low light. He looked at the camera in the light fixture. For a second, our eyes met across the digital divide. He didn't see me, but I saw him. I saw the child I had taught to ride a bike. I saw the boy who had cried when his goldfish died. Now he was a man about to commit a felony because he was too terrified to say no to his wife. They reached my door. Megan didn't hesitate. She didn't knock. She didn't listen. She jammed the flat end of the wrecking bar into the gap between the door and the frame. The sound was a sharp metallic bite that must have echoed like a gunshot in the silent hallway. She leaned her weight into it. The wood groaned. It was a dry, high-pitched sound of structural failure. The Medeco lock I had installed was a masterpiece of engineering. It would not pick. It would not drill. But a lock is only as strong as the wood it is bolted to. Megan wasn't attacking the lock. She was attacking the architecture. She grunted a raw, animalistic sound of effort. She put her boot against the wall for leverage and pulled. Crack! The sound came through the speakers, crisp and violent. The door frame splintered. A piece of trim flew off and hit the opposite wall. The deadbolt held fast to the strike plate, but the wood around the strike plate tore away. The door popped open with a shuddering bang, swinging inward into the darkness of apartment 4B. They froze. They stood in the doorway, breathing hard, waiting for a shout, waiting for a siren. There was only silence. The apartment was a black mouth waiting to swallow them. Go, Megan hissed. They stepped across the threshold. Instantaneously, a red banner flashed across my monitor screen. Silent alarm activated. Priority 1. Dispatch notified. There was no siren in the apartment, no flashing lights. That was the beauty of a commercial-grade silent alarm. It gave the intruder a false sense of security. It let them get deep inside. It let them get comfortable. It ensured that when the police arrived, the suspects wouldn't be running away. They would be standing right in the center of the crime scene, holding the evidence. I switched the camera view to the living room interior. The infrared sensors painted the room in shades of gray and white. I saw the beams of their flashlights cut through the gloom. They swept wildly across the empty walls, the bare floor, the dust motes dancing in the air. "Where is the furniture?" Brandon whispered. His voice was trembling. "It's empty, Megan." He moved out. He didn't move out. Megan snapped. Her beam slashed across the room. "He's hiding. He's playing games. Look for the..." Her light hit the center of the room. It stopped. The beam illuminated the safe. It stood there, anchored to the floor, black and imposing, a monolith of steel and secrets. It looked immovable. It looked like it contained the wealth of nations. Megan let out a sound that was half gasp, half moan. It was the sound of an addict finding a vein. She ran to it. She didn't walk. She ran. She dropped the crowbar on the floor with a clang that vibrated through the room. She fell to her knees in front of the safe. She ran her gloved hands over the cold metal face. She touched the dial. She touched the handle. "Jackpot," she whispered. Her voice was trembling with a manic euphoria. "It's here. It's really here. $500,000. Brandon, look at it. It's huge." Brandon approached slowly. His flashlight beam wavered. It swept over the front of the safe. It illuminated the bright red laminated sign I had taped there hours ago. "Warning: restricted access. Federal tax records. Property of O'Malley Holdings Archives." "Megan." Brandon said, his voice tight with fear. "Look at the sign. It says federal records. It says O'Malley Holdings. This isn't Dad's personal safe. This looks corporate." Megan ripped the sign off. She tore it in half and threw it over her shoulder. The paper fluttered to the floor like dead leaves. "Decoys." She spat. "It's a trick, Brandon. He put that there to scare us. He wants us to think it's official so we don't touch it. It's just a scarecrow. The money is inside. I know it. I can feel it." She grabbed the handle and yanked it. Locked. Of course it was locked. "Give me the drill," she ordered. She held out her hand without looking at him. Brandon didn't move. He was shining his light around the room now, seeing the other signs I had posted. "No trespassing. Authorized personnel only." "This feels wrong, Megan. Why is the apartment empty? Why are there signs? This is a setup. We need to leave." Megan stood up. She turned the flashlight on him, blinding him. "We are not leaving. We are drilling this lock. We are taking that money. And we are going to live the life we deserve. Give me the damn drill." Brandon lowered his head. He reached into the bag slung over his shoulder and pulled out a heavy-duty cordless drill with a carbide bit. He handed it to her. Megan took it. She turned back to the safe. The whine of the drill motor filled the room, a high-pitched mechanical scream that drowned out the sound of reason. She pressed the bit against the steel near the dial. She leaned her weight into it. She was attacking the safe with a feral intensity, sparks flying as the metal bit into the casing. I watched from my tower. I took a sip of my drink. She was drilling into a decoy safe in a room she had broken into while the police were silently surrounding the building. She thought she was minutes away from being rich. She was actually minutes away from being an inmate. She pushed harder. Her face was twisted in a mask of pure greed. She didn't look human anymore. She looked like a creature consumed by hunger. She didn't hear the elevator doors opening down the hall. She didn't hear the soft tread of tactical boots on the carpet. She only heard the drill. She only saw the money she imagined was inside. She was so close. She thought she was winning. I checked the hallway monitor. 6 men in body armor were stacking up outside the door. One of them held a battering ram. Another held a shield. Chief George was at the back, his service weapon drawn but pointed at the floor. They waited. They were waiting for the signal. Or maybe they were just enjoying the show. Megan stopped drilling. She wiped sweat from her forehead. Almost there. She panted. I can feel it giving. She revved the drill again. The sound was a crescendo of entitlement and stupidity. I leaned forward and pressed the button on my console that controlled the lights in Unit 4B. It was time to bring them into the light. The lights in Unit 4B did not flicker on. They slammed on. I had installed high-intensity halogen work lights in the ceiling corners wired to a central switch in the penthouse. 1 second, the room was a cave of shadows, illuminated only by the frantic beam of Megan's flashlight. The next second, it was brighter than a surgical theater. Megan screamed. It was a reflex, a sharp intake of breath followed by a shriek, as her pupils contracted violently against the blinding glare. She dropped the drill. It clattered against the safe, bouncing off the steel door and spinning across the hardwood floor. She threw her hands up to cover her eyes, stumbling back. Brandon didn't scream. He froze. He stood there like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck, his mouth open, his hands still clutching the flashlight that was now useless against the overwhelming brightness. Then came the sound. Police, get on the ground now! The voice was amplified, booming from the hallway. It was not a request. It was a command that vibrated in the chest. The splintered door was kicked wide open, hitting the wall with a force that cracked the plaster. 6 figures in black tactical gear poured into the room. They moved with a terrifying, synchronized aggression. Weapons were raised. Voices were shouting, overlapping, creating a wall of noise designed to disorient and subdue. Hands, let me see your hands, drop the weapon. Megan was still holding the crowbar in her left hand, forgotten in her panic. To the officers storming the room, she wasn't a daughter-in-law looking for an inheritance. She was a suspect armed with a 36-inch steel bar, standing over a drilled safe in a commercial archive. Drop it, or we will fire. A red laser dot appeared on Megan's chest right over her heart. She looked down at it, her brain finally catching up to the reality of the situation. She dropped the crowbar. It hit the floor with a heavy clang. She raised her hands slowly, her face a mask of absolute terror. On your knees, cross your ankles, do not move. 2 officers were on her in a second. One kicked her legs out from under her. She hit the floor hard, her face pressing against the dust she had once complained about. A knee was pressed into her back, pinning her down. Her arms were wrenched behind her. The sound of zip ties zipping tight was loud in the sudden silence that followed the shouting. You are hurting me, Megan wailed. Her voice was muffled against the floorboards. I didn't do anything. This is my father-in-law's apartment. He gave me a key, liar. I whispered from my tower. Brandon had collapsed. He hadn't waited to be tackled. He had dropped to his knees the moment the first officer entered the room. He was curled into a ball, his hands laced behind his head, shaking so hard his teeth were chattering. Don't shoot, please don't shoot, he sobbed. I didn't want to do it. She made me. It was her idea. Shut up, Brandon! Megan screamed from the floor, twisting her head to look at him with venomous eyes. Shut up! 2 more officers hauled Brandon to his feet. He was limp, dead weight. They pushed him against the wall and patted him down. They pulled his wallet, his keys, his phone. They emptied his pockets onto the floor. Clear, one officer shouted. Room secure! Another confirmed. Chief George walked into the room. He wasn't wearing tactical gear. He was wearing a trench coat and a look of weary disgust. He stepped over the crowbar. He looked at the drill lying near the safe. He looked at the signs torn from the safe door. Well, well, he said, his voice calm but carrying effortlessly over Megan's sobbing. What do we have here? Breaking and entering, possession of burglary tools, attempted grand larceny, and judging by the signage you destroyed, tampering with federal records. That is a nice bonus. He looked down at Megan. Megan O'Malley, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. I am not a criminal, Megan shrieked. She was thrashing against the officer holding her, trying to stand up. This is a mistake. My father-in-law is senile. He forgot he moved. We were just checking on his property. Checking on his property with a drill and a crowbar at 2 a.m, George asked, raising an eyebrow. That is a new one. It's his money, she yelled. He has cash in there, $500,000. He stole it from us. It's our inheritance. George leaned down. His face was inches from hers. It isn't your inheritance, honey. It is evidence. And right now you are not an heir. You are a perpetrator. He nodded to his men. Get them up. Take them to the cars. Separate them. I don't want them getting their stories straight. The officers hauled Megan to her feet. She was disheveled, her expensive tracksuit covered in dust, her hair wild. She looked at Brandon, who was weeping openly against the wall. You coward! She screamed at him. Tell them he called us. Tell them he said the money was here. Brandon looked at her. For the first time in his life, he looked at her with something other than adoration or fear. He looked at her with hatred. He didn't call us Megan. He texted me to say goodbye. You brought the drill. You broke the door. I told you we should leave. You useless, pathetic. Her words were cut off as the officer shoved her toward the door. She struggled, kicking out her boots, scuffing the floor. She was fighting like a trapped animal. She wasn't fighting for her freedom anymore. She was fighting because she couldn't accept that she had lost. She couldn't accept that the script had flipped. Get her out of here, George ordered. They dragged her into the hallway. Her screams echoed in the stairwell. I will sue you. I will sue all of you. You don't know who I am. They knew exactly who she was. She was nobody. Brandon was led out next. He didn't fight. He walked with his head down, his shoulders slumped. He looked broken. He looked like a man who had woken up from a long dream to find himself in a nightmare. As he passed the camera in the light fixture, he looked up. He stopped. He stared into the lens. Dad. He whispered. The officer pushed him forward. Keep moving, son. The room was empty now, except for the police. George stood in the center of the chaos, looking around. He looked at the shattered doorframe. He looked at the drill bit broken off in the safe's dial. He looked up at the camera in the corner of the ceiling. He nodded once. It was a signal. Clear. I turned off the monitor in the penthouse. I sat in the silence for a moment. My hands were steady, but my heart felt heavy. It was done. The trap had sprung. The wolves were caged. I stood up and walked to the private elevator. I checked my reflection in the mirror panel. My tie was straight. My suit was crisp. I did not look like a victim. I looked like a CEO. I pressed the button for the lobby. The elevator descended smoothly. I was going down to meet them. I was going down to deliver the final blow. Megan thought she was being arrested for burglary. She thought she could talk her way out of it. She thought this was just a misunderstanding about a family dispute. She didn't know about the shell company. She didn't know about the federal status of the archives. She didn't know that the man walking out of the elevator to meet her wasn't her father-in-law. He was the prosecution. The lobby of Sterling Heights was a theater of blue and red strobe lights. The revolving doors were stopped. Police radios chattered with that static rhythm of organized chaos. Tenants from the lower floors had gathered in their bathrobes, whispering and pointing. They were watching the spectacle of the handcuffed couple being marched toward the exit. Megan was still struggling. She was shouting about lawsuits and rights and the incompetence of the police department. She looked wild. Her hair was matted with sweat and dust from my floor. Her expensive tracksuit was torn at the knee. She looked like exactly what she was. A criminal caught in the act. Brandon walked behind her. He was weeping silently. His head hung so low his chin touched his chest. He looked like a man marching to the gallows. I timed it perfectly. At the far end of the lobby there was a panel of brushed steel that most tenants assumed was a maintenance access. It was the private elevator to the penthouse. It hummed softly. The light above it turned white. The doors slid open with a smooth, expensive hush that cut through the noise of the lobby. I stepped out. I was not wearing the stained cardigan or the loose trousers I had worn for 3 years. I was wearing the charcoal suit tailored in London. My shirt was starched white. My silk tie was a deep crimson. I stood tall, my spine straight, my shoulders squared. I held a leather portfolio in one hand and a glass of scotch in the other. I looked like the man who signed the checks. I looked like the man who owned the concrete under their feet. The silence that rippled through the lobby started near the elevator and spread outward like a wave. The tenants stopped whispering. The police officers who weren't busy holding suspects straightened up. Megan saw me. She stopped fighting. Her eyes went wide. She blinked rapidly, trying to reconcile the image of the confused old pensioner she bullied with the titan standing across the marble floor. "Gerald," she gasped. Her voice was raspy from screaming. "Gerald, tell them. Tell them who I am. Tell them this is a mistake. Tell them you gave me permission." She lunged forward, dragging the officer holding her arm a few inches before he jerked her back. "Dad." Brandon looked up. His face was streaked with tears and grime. "Dad, please, help us." I did not move toward them. I did not rush to comfort them. I walked slowly toward the center of the room. My shoes clicked on the marble, a sharp, authoritative sound. I stopped 5 feet away from them. I took a sip of my drink. I looked at Megan not with anger, but with the clinical detachment of an auditor examining a fraudulent ledger. "Permission," I said. The word hung in the air. My voice was deep, steady, and completely devoid of the tremor I had faked for months. "You are claiming I gave you permission to use a wrecking bar on a reinforced door at 2 in the morning. You are claiming I gave you permission to drill into a safe marked federal records." Megan flinched. She heard the change in my voice. She saw the clarity in my eyes. The fog of senility she had relied on was gone. You are okay," she stammered. "You aren't confused." I smiled. It was the smile of a shark who just tasted blood in the water. "I have never been confused, Megan. I have been patient. There is a difference." Chief George walked over to me. He holstered his weapon. He nodded respectfully. "Mr. O'Malley, we secured the suspects inside the archives room. They had breached the outer door and were attempting to breach the containment unit. We have the tools in evidence. We have the video feed you provided. It is a clean catch." Megan looked between us. Her brain was misfiring. "Mr. O'Malley," she whispered, "why is he calling you that? Why is he talking to you like that? You are just a tenant. You live in 4B, you are nobody." I handed my glass to a passing officer who took it instinctively. I stepped closer to Megan. I wanted her to see the stitching on my lapel. I wanted her to smell the expensive scotch. "I do not live in 4B, Megan. I staged 4B. I live in the penthouse. I have lived there for 15 years. I gestured around the lobby with a sweeping motion of my hand. "I do not pay rent here. I collect it. I am the chairman of O'Malley Holdings. I own this building. I own the building next door. I own the commercial park where your husband used to pretend to work." Brandon made a sound like a dying animal. He fell to his knees again, dragging the officers down with him. "You own it," he choked out. "You have money, you have millions, and you let us live like this. You let us struggle." I looked down at my son. The disappointment was a cold stone in my gut. "I let you live like a man, Brandon. I gave you an education. I gave you a debt-free start. I gave you the opportunity to build your own life. Instead, you married a woman who measures love in credit limits, and you decided it was easier to steal from your father than to work for a living." I turned back to Megan. She was shaking her head slowly back and forth. "No. This is a trick. This is another one of your delusions. You are poor. You are old. You can't be this." I pulled a document from my leather portfolio. It was the fresh court order Beatrice had drafted. It had the seal of the federal district court. "This is not a delusion, Megan. This is a federal complaint. You see, when you broke into Unit 4B, you didn't break into a private residence. You broke into a designated corporate archive facility housing sensitive financial data and federal tax records. I held the paper up so she could read the header. That makes this corporate espionage. That makes it aggravated identity theft. That makes it a federal crime with a mandatory minimum sentence that will ensure you are an old woman by the time you see the outside of a cell." Megan read the paper. Her face went gray. The arrogance drained out of her, leaving only a hollow terror. But we are family," she whispered. "You can't send family to federal prison." I leaned in close. "You stopped being family the moment you rifled through my medicine cabinet to see when I would die. You stopped being family when you told my son to put me in a home so you could buy a new car. Tonight, you are just an intruder, and I am just the man pressing charges." I looked at George. "Take them away, Chief. I have a meeting with my lawyers in the morning to discuss the eviction of their cats." "Wait!" Megan screamed as they hauled her backward. "Wait, Gerald, Dad, I'm sorry. We can fix this. I'll sign anything. Don't do this." Her screams were loud, piercing, and utterly useless. They dragged her through the revolving doors. The cold night air rushed in. The blue lights washed over her face one last time before they shoved her into the back of the cruiser. Brandon didn't scream. He just looked at me through the glass of the lobby doors. He looked at the suit. He looked at the elevator. He looked at the father he had underestimated. He mouthed one word. "Why?" I didn't answer him. He knew why. The cars pulled away. The sirens didn't wail. They just faded into the traffic of the city. The lobby was quiet again. The tenants were staring at me with wide eyes. They saw the old man from 4B who used to carry his own groceries standing there like a king. I turned to the night concierge who had been watching from behind the desk with his mouth open. "Henry," I said. "Yes, Mr. O'Malley." He stammered. "Have a cleaning crew sent to Unit 4B immediately. I want the door replaced. And send a bottle of the 18-year-old single malt up to the penthouse. I am celebrating." "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." I walked back to the private elevator. I pressed the button. The doors slid open. I stepped inside and turned to face the lobby one last time. I was alone. I was wealthy. I was powerful. And I had just cut the cancer out of my life. The doors closed. The elevator began to rise. I loosened my tie. It was done. The legal trap was shut tight. Now came the paperwork. Now came the final dismantling of their lives. But for tonight, I was going to sit on my balcony and watch the city lights and listen to the beautiful sound of absolutely nothing. I sat on the cold metal chair across from them. The interrogation room smelled of stale coffee and fear. It was a smell I knew well from my days auditing corrupt CEOs who realized too late that they had cooked the books one too many times. Megan sat with her hands cuffed to the table. The orange jumpsuit they had put her in clashed horribly with her pale, shocked face. Brandon sat next to her looking at his hands. He hadn't spoken since they brought him in. Beatrice sat beside me opening her briefcase with the slow, deliberate movements of an executioner sharpening an axe. "You can stop this, Gerald," Megan whispered. Her voice was raspy. She had screamed herself hoarse in the holding cell. "You can tell them it was a misunderstanding. You can tell them you invited us. If you don't, I swear to God I will tell everyone you are senile. I will tell the press you set us up." I leaned forward. I placed my hands on the table. "You will tell the press nothing, Megan, because nobody cares what a convicted felon has to say about the victim of her crime. And you are not going to trial for burglary. That would be too easy. You are going to federal court." Beatrice slid a photo across the table. It was a picture of the interior of the safe taken by the forensic team. It showed the drill bit she had broken off in the lock. It showed the mutilated steel. And it showed the contents. The stack of leather-bound ledgers stamped with the O'Malley Holdings seal. "Do you know what you were drilling into?" Beatrice asked. Her tone was conversational, almost pleasant. "You weren't drilling into a piggy bank. You were attempting to breach a federally compliant storage unit containing historical tax records for a multinational holding company." Megan looked at the photo. She looked confused. "They are just papers," she said. "Where is the cash?" "You said there was cash." I laughed. It was a dry sound. "There was never any cash, Megan. I am a forensic accountant. I don't keep cash. I keep records. Those ledgers you were trying to destroy contain the audit trails for assets worth millions. By attacking that safe, you committed corporate espionage. You attempted to destroy federal tax documents. Do you know what the mandatory minimum sentence is for that?" Beatrice answered for her. 10 years, no parole. And since you crossed state lines to buy the burglary tools, we are adding trafficking and criminal instruments to the list. You are looking at a decade in a federal penitentiary, Megan. You will be 40 years old when you get out." Megan's face crumbled. The arrogance, the anger, the entitlement, it all evaporated, leaving behind a terrified child. She looked at Brandon. "Do something," she hissed. "He is your father. Make him stop." Brandon looked up. His eyes were hollow. He looked at me. "Dad," he said softly. "Please. She is my wife. We have a life. We just wanted to get ahead. We were desperate. You have so much. Why couldn't you just help us?" I looked at my son. I looked at the man who had stood by while his wife stole my dead wife's watch. I looked at the man who had agreed to put me in a home so he could inherit a fortune he hadn't earned. "I did help you, Brandon," I said. "I paid your tuition. I paid for your wedding. I paid your rent for 3 years when you said you were struggling with your startup. I helped you until my back broke from carrying you. But you didn't want help. You wanted a handout. And when I stopped giving it, you decided to take it." I pulled a document from my portfolio. It was a single sheet of paper. "This is my will, Brandon. Or rather, it was my will. I placed it on the table. I updated it this morning. Before last night, everything was going to you. The building, the portfolio, the accounts, all of it. I was going to leave you an empire." Brandon stared at the paper. His hands twitched. "But now," I continued, "now you get nothing. I have established a blind trust. The assets will be liquidated and donated to the pension fund for victims of elder abuse. You are disinherited, Brandon, completely. You have no home. You have no money. And in about 10 minutes, you are going to be processed for conspiracy to commit a felony." Brandon began to weep. It was a silent, ugly crying. He put his head on this table and shook. He wasn't crying because he was sorry. He was crying because he realized the magnitude of his loss. He had traded a kingdom for a chance to steal a few crumbs. Megan stared at me with pure hatred. "I hope you die alone," she spat. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. "I will not die alone, Megan. I will die in peace, which is more than you will have in your cell." I turned to Beatrice. "We are done here. Give the district attorney the file. Tell him we are not interested in a plea deal unless it involves her leaving the state forever." And Brandon, I looked at the back of my son's head. "If you ever decide to be a man instead of an accessory, you know where to find me. But don't come knocking on my door without an apology and a job." I walked out of the interrogation room. The heavy steel door clanged shut behind me, sealing them in their new reality. I walked through the bullpen of the police station. The air tasted sweet. It tasted like justice. I had lost a son, but I had regained my life. And as I walked out into the sunlight, I knew that for the first time in years, I was truly free. The plea negotiation happened 3 weeks later in a small conference room at the courthouse. Megan sat with a public defender who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Beatrice sat next to me, looking like she owned the building. The district attorney placed a file on the table. He laid out the options. It was a simple binary choice. Door number 1 was a trial where we would introduce video evidence of her drilling into a safe-marked federal property. That road ended in a mandatory 10-year sentence in a federal facility. Door number 2 was the offer Beatrice had drafted. It was brutal. It was comprehensive. It was designed to erase her from my life completely. Megan would plead guilty to a lesser charge of attempted burglary. She would serve 18 months in a state facility followed by 5 years of probation. But there were conditions. Civil conditions attached to a settlement agreement that would drop the corporate espionage charges. She had to sign the divorce papers immediately. She had to waive any claim to alimony or marital assets. She had to sign away her parental rights to the hypothetical grandchildren she had threatened me with in the past. And most importantly, she had to agree to a restraining order that covered the entire state of Illinois. Once she was released, she had 24 hours to cross the state line and never come back. Megan cried. She begged. She looked at Brandon, who was sitting in the corner of the room looking like a ghost. He didn't look up. He had already signed his own agreement. Megan signed. Her hand shook so hard the pen tore through the paper. As the bailiffs led her away, she looked back one last time. There was no hate in her eyes anymore. Just the empty realization that she had gambled everything on a pair of deuces and lost to a royal flush. Brandon waited until she was gone. He walked over to the table. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just asked what happened next. I handed him a bus ticket and a laminated card. I bought a construction company in North Dakota, Brandon. They specialize in pouring concrete foundations in sub-zero temperatures. It is hard work. It is honest work. It pays minimum wage. Brandon took the ticket. He looked at the destination. Fargo. You start on Monday, I said. You will live in the crew bunkhouse. You will work 12 hours a day. You will learn what it feels like to earn $1 instead of waiting for one to fall into your lap. If you stick it out for a year, if you show me you can build something instead of just taking it, we will talk. Until then, you are on your own. Brandon nodded. He put the ticket in his pocket. He looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw a flicker of the boy I used to know. Thank you, Dad, he whispered. He walked out of the room. He didn't look back. He had a long bus ride ahead of him, and a longer road to redemption. I walked out of the courthouse alone. The air was crisp. The sun was shining. I took a deep breath. It felt different, lighter. The weight of the deception was gone. The weight of the fear was gone. I took a cab back to Sterling Heights. The doorman opened the door for me. "Good afternoon, Mr. O'Malley," he said with a smile. It was genuine. I took the private elevator up to the 40th floor. The doors opened into the silence of my sanctuary. I poured a glass of the vintage wine I had been saving. I walked out onto the balcony. The city was spread out below me, a tapestry of lights and steel. The wind whipped at my tie, but I didn't button my jacket. I felt strong. I felt alive. I pulled Catherine's pocket watch from my pocket. The police had returned it to me in an evidence bag. I polished the silver case with my thumb. "It is done, Catherine," I said to the wind. "The house is clean." I took a sip of the wine. It tasted of oak and berries and victory. I watched the sun begin to rise over the lake, painting the water in shades of gold and fire. I was 71 years old. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. I had my peace, I had my dignity, and for the first time in a very long time, I was looking forward to tomorrow. The sun broke the horizon. A new day, a new life, and this time I was the one holding the keys. We often convince ourselves that family is a sacred bond that must survive any betrayal, but I learned that the most dangerous intruders are the ones with keys to your front door. Tolerating disrespect is not love, it is enabling. By finally drawing a hard line in the sand, I didn't just protect my assets, I reclaimed my dignity. It is a harsh truth, but sometimes you must let the people you love hit rock bottom so they can learn to stand on their own. Peace is a lonely purchase, but it is the only investment that truly pays dividends. If you believe that respect must be earned and not just inherited, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice served cold.